Here today. Welcome to meeting number 22 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. The committee is meeting in public today to receive two separate briefings. So there will be two one-hour panels. During the first hour, the Auditor General will provide us with a further briefing regarding the reports that were tabled in the House on Thursday, February 25th. And during the second hour, we will begin a study of the departmental plans 2021-22 and the main estimates for 2022. As you know, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021, and therefore members may be attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Just a couple of reminders for members and our guests. For those participating virtually, interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. And should any technical challenges arise, please do advise me, and note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we do want to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. I know that we are all, I believe, attending virtually. So I'd now like to welcome Karen Hogan, Auditor General. With her today are Dawn Campbell, Principal, Duzanne Duvniak, Principal, Philippe Legoff, Principal, Carol McCullough, Principal, Nicholas Swales, Principal, and Glenn Wheeler, Principal. Joining her during the second hour, we'll have Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Kimberly LeBlanc, Principal, Human Resources, and Helene Haddad, Principal, Financial Management. I know that Ms. Hogan does have some opening remarks, so I will turn it over to her for those opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am pleased to discuss our audit reports, which were tabled in the House of Commons on February 25th. As you mentioned, I'm accompanied by all the principals who were responsible for those audits. Included in my February reports was a copy of our special examination of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. I'm pleased to report that we found no significant deficiencies in the Foundation's corporate management practices or management of outreach and awareness activities during the period covered by our audit. Let's start with our audit of the government procurement of complex IT systems. Many of the government's IT systems are aging and need to be replaced to better serve Canadians. They include systems that deliver benefits like employment insurance, old age security and pensions, systems that are used to pay government employees, and systems that support government telecommunications infrastructure. Overall, we found that the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, Public Services and Procurement Canada, Employment and Social Development Canada, and Shared Services Canada made good progress in modernizing their procurement approaches. For example, in two of the three complex IT procurements that we looked at, they introduced new agile practices that included breaking down mega projects into smaller ones, and they consulted early and often with end users and private sector suppliers to define business needs and design solutions.
We also found that there was room for improvement in some areas, such as guidance and training for procurement officers and better mechanisms for monitoring fairness, openness, and transparency. I am encouraged by the openness to explore new ways of doing business that we've noted in this audit. To pave the way for further progress, these organizations will need to build on what they've learned so far to continue modernizing their procurement approaches and maximize services and support for Canadians. Let's turn now to our audit of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. This audit provided an opportunity to examine a complex program in its early stages once the procurement process was completed. Overall, we found that during our audit period, the national shipbuilding strategy was slow to deliver the combat and non-combat ships that Canada needs to meet its domestic and international obligations for science and defense. The delivery of many ships had been significantly delayed. Further delays could result in several ships being retired before their replacements are operational. National Defence, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada reacted to issues impacting the timely delivery of ships. They made key decisions during the audit so as to improve the prospects of timely future deliveries.
I am still concerned that the strategy has been slow to deliver. Considering the unknown impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on work in departments and shipyards, and with the bulk of new ships yet to be built, departments need to look for opportunities to further improve how they manage risks and contingencies. I'm now going to go to a couple of audits that more closely impact day-to-day life of Canadians. The first examine the Canada Child Benefit Program. This income-based benefit program is important to help families who need financial support raise their children. The audit also reviewed the one-time additional payment of up to $300 per child issued in May 2020 to help eligible families during the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, we found that the Canada Revenue Agency managed the Canada Child Benefit Program in a way that provided accurate and timely payments to millions of eligible families. We also noted areas where the agency could improve the administration of the program. For example, a better information sharing process with other organizations that notified the agency when recipients left the country permanently would enable the agency to avoid issuing payments based on outdated information. Turning to another people story, we audited Indigenous Services Canada's support to ensure that First Nations communities have reliable access to safe drinking water. Despite committing to do so by March 2021, Indigenous Services Canada did not meet the government's commitment to remove all long-term drinking water advisories for public systems in First Nations communities. Drinking water advisories have remained a constant for many communities, with almost half outstanding for more than 10 years. In some cases, advisories were lifted as a result of interim measures that did not fully address the underlying deficiencies. The department's effort to address the problems have been constrained by a number of issues, including an outdated policy and formula for funding the operation and maintenance of public water systems. The department has also been working to revise the legislative framework to provide First Nations communities with drinking water protections comparable to other communities in Canada. I am very concerned and honestly disheartened that this long-standing issue is still not resolved. Access to safe drinking water is a basic human necessity. I don't believe that anyone would say that this is in any way an acceptable situation in Canada in 2021. Indigenous Services Canada must work in partnership with First Nations to develop and implement a lasting solution for safe drinking water in First Nations communities. Je vais passer maintenant au dernier audit.
Let's go now to our last report. This audit followed up on selected recommendations from our 2013 audit of Transport Canada's oversight of rail safety. We found that Transport Canada had yet to fully address our recommendations from 2013. While the department has made important improvements to the way it plans and prioritizes its activities and follows up on rail companies' plans and actions to address deficiencies, it is unable to show whether these actions have contributed to improved rail safety overall. And they weren't able to show, as I said, that these actions had contributed to improved rail safety overall. When you devote people and time to addressing issues, you should be able to measure if that investment is making a difference. Rail safety accidents can have serious consequences, causing devastating loss of life and environmental damage. I am very concerned that while Transport Canada has taken some actions to address our recommendations, 8 years after our last audit, there is still much left to do to improve the oversight of rail safety in Canada. All of these audits touch on areas that have direct and indirect ramifications for Canadians across the country, whether it's reliable access to safe drinking water or ensuring the safe movement of people and goods on our national railways. There are some serious and long-standing issues here. They need to be resolved permanently and soon. Madam Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. We will now go to our first round of questioning. It's a 6-minute round, and we will start with Mr. Weber.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Karen Hogan, for being here today and your principals as well. I'd like to focus on your report. You alluded to it in your opening comments on access to safe drinking water in First Nation communities. Now, in your introduction, Ms. Hogan, you talk about safe drinking water being vital to the health and well-being of Canadians, including 3,300 First Nation communities. And access to safe drinking water can also boost the community's economic growth and help reduce poverty. You mentioned, however, that many First Nation communities live without this assurance that their drinking water is safe to this day. You mentioned that some First Nation communities continue to experience a lack of access to safe drinking water. I'd like to know how many communities continue to experience this lack of safe drinking water. In 2015 also, we all know that the federal government has promised or did promise to address this long-standing issue. It committed to eliminating all long-term drinking water advisories on public water systems on First Nation reserves by, and you mentioned March 31st of 2021. That's in 20 days. Of course, they did not meet the commitment, and it is incredibly disappointing that they didn't. The government has allocated, back in 2016, they allocated $2 billion. November 20th of 2020, another $1.5 billion in additional funding, and an additional $114 million per year for maintenance. And so with all this money invested, Canadians and First Nation communities continue to have issues, and it is a national embarrassment. There has been progress. Of course, there's been progress because $3.5 billion has been invested in this thing, but we still continue to have a long way to go. And, I'm assuming that the easy fixes were done and they've been done long ago, but it's the more costly and more complex cases that remain. Is that the case, Ms. Hogan?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I'll hopefully answer all of the little bits there. If not, please remind me if I missed something. You started off talking about drinking water advisories and how many communities are impacted. So our audit covered a period from November of 2015 until November of 2020. Over that time, there were 100 long-term drinking water advisories that had been lifted, and at the end of our audit, 60 remain. Those 60 that remain are across 41 communities in the country. What we did see is that steps were made to lift some of the long-term drinking water advisories, and as you mentioned, the government also mentioned in December, I think, that they would not meet the commitment by March, and we saw that as well, that they will not meet it by the end of this month. The issue, one of the fundamental ones, is the funding formula. So this funding formula has not been revisited in 30 years. And so that I would agree with you is a bit of a long-standing issue. 30 years is a long time to not go revisit a funding formula. And what we found is that it's not meeting the needs of the First Nations. It's not addressing the actual costs. It hasn't been updated to reflect new technology that may be there. And one of the repercussions is likely that operators are not being paid the same amount as their counterparts in other parts of the country. And hence having qualified operators is impeding the ability to have good, effective water treatment systems. So it is about finding those root causes and addressing those root causes and not just temporary solutions.
And Karen, yes, I wanted to get into that as well, the employee retention and the training in these water treatment facilities. They certainly do seem to be a reoccurring issue in your report. It is expensive, of course, to train new people in these water treatment facilities. Is this retention issue, is it unique to the industry and this type of work, or do we see this same retention issue? Do we see it off reserve as well? What are the underlying causes of this retention and the problems with retention?
I think that's an excellent question when we talk about the North, and we do cover that in so many of our audit reports. And I'm not sure if one of my principals wanted to add, but let me offer up, I guess, what I know that I've been seeing is that retaining qualified individuals in the North and having housing for them is a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. And it's not just necessarily about salary, but it's also about places to live. It's about integrating those individuals into the communities there. So it is much broader than just a monetary issue, and it is one that we see not just in water treatment facilities, but in other areas that we audit. So I'm not sure if Mr. Glenn Wheeler wanted to add anything to that, Madam Chair, or if that answered the member's question.
Yeah. I guess where I'd like to go here is, we know that we want to promote careers on reserve, and we strongly encourage and welcome Indigenous operators. Do any of the reserves restrict these water supply jobs to Indigenous or band workers only? And if so, has this created any continuity issues in operations of the plant? Is it a factor in finding qualified people to fill these positions? Or I'll just let you address that. I think I've run out of time here. So.
Well, really quickly, I think I'll let Glenn address that, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, a very short answer, please. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, hopefully everyone can hear me. My microphone does not appear to be working very well. But Mr. Weber, you're quite correct that there are some long-standing issues.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm having audio issues. I'm not hearing Mr. Wheeler very well.
I think all I heard him say was, you are correct, it's a really long-standing issue, but I couldn't make much out.
Right. Definitely having difficulty.
Problems with my microphone. I don't know if anyone can hear me.
Very muffled, very difficult to hear you. Perhaps we can move on to the next questioner and we can come back to Mr. Weber's question. I don't know if there's someone that needs to
Madame la Présidente, rappel au règlement.
Madam Chair, a matter of order, please. Can you inform witnesses of the necessity, have they been informed of the necessity of wearing a headset? They need to be informed of that. And Madam Clerk can make sure for the next meeting that everyone has their headset, because currently we're losing time and we can't do our work properly. Thank you.
Madam
Chair, perhaps my question that I asked can be distributed to the committee in writing, and that way we can then move on and continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. So, Ms. Hogan, if we could get an answer to that question in writing, that would be great. Okay, we will move on to Mr. Fergus for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope that my questions won't require an answer from Mr. Wheeler while we're dealing with these microphone issues. First of all, thank you very much, Ms. Hogan, for appearing before this committee once again. I'm concerned Well, I echo what Mr. Weber said about these drinking water advisories. And these are in Indigenous communities. Madam Hogan, I'm looking for what you said exactly in your statement at the beginning. Could you inform the committee of how many drinking water advisories were in place at the beginning of the government's commitment to settle this problem? And have there been new drinking water advisories that were added to the list? Well, I will do my best without getting Mr. Wheeler involved. I would refer you to a diagram in our report at 3.2. During the report, between November 2015 to 2020, we noted that 100 drinking water advisories had been removed and about 60 were left at the end of our audit period. Now, of course, it goes up and down over time, but these are the numbers that I have for you. And there's a little graph that you can go look at for a little more information. Yes, indeed. And we've seen that there were additional things added onto this. Now, well, let me change the way I phrase this. The committee is looking at this matter. When the government had made a commitment, what I understood from your report is that there were 101 drinking water advisories that had been lifted. So the matter had been settled. But then other ones had been added on to the list. As you mentioned, there were highs and lows. Now, is it just a matter of this outdated formula for the funding? And what would it take for the government to update this funding formula for the Indigenous communities? Well, what I'd like to add is that our audit looked at the drinking water advisories for long-term drinking water, but there are also short-term drinking water advisories. And a long-term advisory is there for more than 365 days. But we realized that there were short-term advisories that had been there for almost 300 days. So there has to be a long-term sustainable solution and not just grabbing the problem and pushing it into the future. And not only using temporary solutions. So yes, funding is one issue, but there's also a legislative framework that needs to be established. There is legislative text that was created, but with no connected regulations, and those are what offer the protective measures and that will lead to real change to enforce the text. That's what's lacking, the associated regulations. There are plans. We did see some long-term plans, but those plans they're a little bit behind, and in some cases we're talking 2024, 2025. So in some cases there are measures, and in other cases there aren't any long-term plans. So we really need an overall comprehensive plan. Can you say if in your opinion, or if in the opinion, your opinion based on the audit, is the idea for the best solution to find the best solution that was to find one that has been created with the communities themselves? Yes, definitely. One solution for one community, though, is not necessarily the best one for all of them. So we do have to engage with the communities to find the best solution to meet their needs and challenges. So I'd like to come back to my original point. Are the regulations really all we need? Or are there other initiatives, customized initiatives that need to be created that reflect the abilities and the location of the community? Yes, the place where the communities are located. I think it's really both. The regulations provide protective measures that all other communities in Canada have, and Indigenous communities should have those protective measures too. They're, they're protected by laws that are then enforced, and they also need to help identify the solution that they need. Then there's the question of operators. We just looked at public systems, but there are also non-public systems, and they need additional skills and things put in place so that the water be drinkable. Thank you. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Fergus and Ms. Hogan. We will now move on to Mr. Blanchette-Juncan for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello to all of the witnesses today. Ms. Hogan, welcome to the committee. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And I'd also like to mention that it's always pleasant to have you here. And I'd also like to congratulate you for your exceptional work. Now, you do seem optimistic around the current and progressive management throughout the IT changes through the public service. However, there are a few things that stood out to me, and I want to check some things with you. Currently, can you support, well, the moral assurance, if I may? Now, in some situations are quite deplorable. For example, the Phoenix situation. I know your predecessor was shocked by that situation. More specifically, is communication between managers in charge of this up to par, in your opinion, to avoid such a fiasco happening in the future? Yes, as you mentioned, I am encouraged to see that the government is trying to do things differently. We can't repeat or do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. So it is important to note that they are trying a procurement process that's agile. We observed that they had learned strong lessons from Phoenix and that they took time to collaborate with suppliers before laying out their needs and awarding a contract. And we also saw, and even though if it wasn't always efficient, but we saw the participation of end users. And I'm encouraged by this positive step forward, but we can't let our guard down. Over the three solutions we looked at, pardon me, Ms. Hogan, what I observed in your report, and I even took out the 2018 report, is that the conclusion from 2018 spoke about a lack of communication between senior officials in connection with Phoenix. And from the 2020 report at 1.48 on governance, the same observations are made. So you can see a few years later, we're seeing once again that communication and the involvement of senior officials for organizing procurement projects around IT, well, this needs to be reinforced. So that is where I am suspecting there are still problems. Of course, things are moving forward, things are improving, but it's still quite striking that the major problem that you noticed, that your office noticed in 2018 with Phoenix, well, the same problems are yet again in the 2020 report. So what can you say to that? Well, what we saw for the next Phoenix generation, the next pay system, well, the Treasury Board got involved with the managers, departmental groups, task force were put together so that other people would be involved. We didn't see that with the communication system. What I can tell you is that you can have good policies, but you also need to have the willingness of the individuals. This is a change of approach, a change in mindset. And this is something that senior officials need. An IT procurement system is very complicated, and so it's important to listen, engage people, and sometimes we have seen that problem, and we mentioned it in the audit. It's important to not let things slide. It is a step forward, but we have to keep up our efforts. So from what I understand, Ms. Hogan, is that you hope that in your report there will be more communication between the departments and senior officials. Is that right? Well, not in all three. We really saw that for the future generation, but for the others, yes, we did see problems with oversight, governance, roles and responsibilities. So yes, there are some problems that are recurring, and it really requires greater focus on the part of senior officials. Thank you. I'll move to another subject now. Of course, I'm disappointed as well about Transport Canada, and this has to do with railway safety. Do you have any possible solutions to share with us that would force the government to uphold your recommendations so that those become binding? Well, I agree with you. I am concerned with the time that has passed since 2013, and in my opinion, this is a very important recommendation to measure the efficiency of the measures that had not been addressed. It requires collaboration between our office and parliamentary committees to keep the pressure on, to do follow-up with the department to make sure that they address our recommendations, and to make sure that it doesn't just become an answer to a report and then be forgotten. In the case of railway safety, it's extremely important, and we've seen this across the country. A follow-up for these important things needs to be done. And the only thing I'd like to highlight is that in any project, if time and people are being invested, then we should be able to determine if it's efficient. And it's this last step that everybody should be able to do. Exactly. And so there are plans in place, if I understand, but we don't know if the desired results have been achieved. There's been an increase in railway accidents over the last 10 years. That was mentioned last July, a 40% increase in railway accidents. Is there not a connection between Transport Canada's laxism and the increase in accidents? Yes, we have seen that Transport Canada has increased their activities. They have increased the number of inspections, their corrective measures follow-ups, and the point is to determine the efficiency of all their activities. But when we're talking about the increase of railway accidents, it's important to not just look at that number and to take it into perspective. There's also been an increase in traffic on railways. So you have to take it into context.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan and Mr. Blanchette-Jonca. We will now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Certainly some really incredibly important societal questions being put in these audit reports today. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Weber, for leading out on what I believe to be the most important one. And I'll share with you, I'm going to have a comment first, and then I'll get into my questions, that as a Hamilton City Councillor, the most rigorous training that I had was in water protection. It was in the water regulation and distribution within my municipality, and that was because of the Walkerton crisis. And as Ontarians will recall, that crisis demanded for an immediate action by the government to ensure that the children who were made sick by the E. coli poisoning in those communities would never happen again. And one of the ways that they did that was they put a greater fiduciary responsibility on municipalities to give them culpability should these outbreaks occur. And out of all the things that I learned as a city councillor, nothing strikes me more than the seriousness in which that first orientation occurred regarding the water regulations due to Walkerton. And in these reports, I have a list of deficiencies and highlights that is pages long. I can't help but think as a member of parliament, if we had in our House of Commons a fiduciary responsibility, a culpability as individual MPs to ensure that our First Nations had clean drinking water, how quickly this would have been resolved. And what I also don't want to lose in my opening comment, Madam Chair, is that in every statistic and every metric, there is a community and there are stories and there are people. And I think about Grassy Narrows and the response that they got. Thanks for the donation. I think about the work of my colleague, my MPP colleague, Sol Mamakwa, in calling for the people who were evacuated from Niskandaga. 250 people having to leave their communities, having been under water advisory since 1995. When Mr. Weber says this is a national embarrassment, he's not understating what's before us here today. This is a damning report. And if it wasn't for COVID and it wasn't for all the other, things that were happening, I would hope that this would be central to our moral obligations as MPs to take care of. Ms. Hogan, you identified the funding, the outdated funding policy formulas that go back 30 years, the new technologies. In your audit, did you ever come up with an actual figure, a cost analysis? Is the parliamentary budget office, or is there a number that would give us in terms of the scale and scope of this problem, that if we were to throw, $10 billion, $100 billion at it, we could solve it?
So I know that Glenn put his boom mic on, so hopefully he'll be able to answer that. We didn't really focus on that side of it, and he might have an idea or some thoughts to share with you. What we did question was, even though there was additional funding committed, whether or not that would be sufficient to meet the needs. When you're basing it on a funding formula that hasn't been revisited for a while, that's not meeting current needs, that may not reflect new technology, isn't meeting the needs of salary expectations, and it's only addressing the long-term drinking.
But I really want to focus in. I want to get laser focused on the size and scope of this problem. It's before us as a committee. We're providing recommendations. We need to get to the numbers. We need to know. We have the long list of failures, and I really want to shift to figuring out what is the scope of this, right? This is a government that found $750 billion in liquidity supports for Bay Street and big banks during COVID. We got $100 billion out to Canadians and workers. I can't, in my good conscience, representing Hamilton Centre, think that for a moment, if what happened in Niskandaga was happening in Hamilton Centre, I wouldn't be, lighting myself on fire in this committee right now. That's what's before us. So from your staff's perspective, when you do this report, when you're dealing with the departments, when hopefully they're being transparent, we know what their failures are. What is the dollar amount?
So I don't believe that we have that dollar amount. I will allow Glenn to jump in there. A lot of that would be forward-looking and projections, and perhaps the parliamentary budget officer can assist with that. But let's turn to Glenn and see what he could maybe add to the dialogue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm on my third headphone, so hopefully people can hear me this time. To our knowledge, there's no overall assessment of the total cost to fix this issue. But as the Auditor General has mentioned, the government has provided a lot of funding in recent years to.
I'm going to stop there. I'll be satisfied with the fact that in taking on this program, nobody yet has come up with a number about what can solve this. Very problematic. It seems like everybody is on on the process and not on the outcomes, and that is an ongoing problem with this government. I want to get back to the fact that there is no regulatory regime to ensure access to safe water in First Nations communities that provide legal binding force protections. Is that correct?
There is an act that was put in place, but not the underlying regulations. Yeah.
So how, I can't understand when people are drafting legislation for something this serious, that they talk about these processes, they make these announcements, but there's no actual binding nature to these agreements. Is there recommendations coming from your office that would address these shortfalls? Because this seems to be, first and foremost, going back to my time as a Hamilton City Councillor, the most significant piece.
A very short answer, please, Ms. Hogan.
You know what? Don't even worry about it, because I'm going to definitely come back to it second round. So
Okay.
Staff, feel free to go and find that answer out. I'll come back to it in my 2.5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. We will now move to our second round of questioning. 5 minutes, Mr. Berthold.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hello, Ms. Hogan. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Mr. Green. not necessarily completely in agreement with you, but you would understand that in my situation with what happened in Lac Mégantic, this report is very important to me too because of the railway safety. Ms. Hogan, since you published your report, I had the opportunity to talk to people from my riding and people from Lac Mégantic. Imagine that these people be told what you said. I'm very concerned by the fact that 8 years after our last audit, that was before the Lac Mégantic tragedy, June 2013, whereas the tragedy happened in July, there are still many things to be done to improve railway safety in Canada. Ms. Hogan, the question I have for you, because we had the opportunity in the Transport Committee to go to Lac Mégantic, and there were recommendations made, a report to Transport Canada, and a lot of analysis were performed. What can we do? What can we do so that your next report is not like this one? When the public gets this report, well, it's unacceptable to hear things like this from the General Auditor of Canada when there are things that can be done. I'd like to let you have the opportunity to offer some solutions because I do not know how to address this issue anymore. I don't want to see sentences like that anymore. Thank you for the question. I also want to mention that the Environment and Sustainable Development Commissioner had tabled a report just before mine on dangerous merchandise shipping, and it mentioned the same concerns that our report has. And I think that this may be why Transport Canada has to look at the efficiency of the measures they're taking. It's great to have lots of activities, but they don't know if they're the right measures to be taking. Are they the ones that are really going to improve railway safety? It's important to say that any mode of transportation is dangerous, and that includes railway transportation. So it's inevitable there will be accidents, but one has to be able to try to avoid them or at least make sure that everything possible has been done to improve railway safety. And that's where I have a question. It's not clear if the measures they've put in place are the right ones or not, or if they're efficient. There's a question of accountability here. When you say they, you're talking about Transport Canada, and that's very broad. Have you identified who at Transport Canada is responsible for this lack of follow-up for these recommendations? Well, that's an odd question. Yes, when I say they, I mean Transport Canada, and it's also in collaboration with railway companies because Transport Canada oversees safety, but the safety systems themselves are within the railway companies. I would say that the deputy minister of any department is responsible for all actions of a department. The sector and the individuals, while I don't know who they are, I could perhaps ask my team, but I don't know if that would add anything. Yes, personally, I think it would, because indeed, I think there are too many people. Well, when you're not directly responsible, you're not responsible at all. So I think that it would be good to clearly identify the line of command, because we can't allow another tragedy like the one that happened in Lac Mégantic, and we can't allow for other tragedies elsewhere. We have to put everything in place to ensure safety, even if we know that it's inevitable that some accidents will happen. We're all aware of that. Ms. Hogan, following these recommendations and these conclusions, which are quite severe where Transport Canada is concerned, do you intend to follow up quickly with this report and not wait as long as the time after the 2013 report so that you can verify if Transport Canada is following up and accountable for their actions and find out whether their measures are negative or positive? One of the new things we're going to do soon is a follow-up on a number of audits, exactly like you said. the recommendations, not to come up with a huge report, but to do a stronger follow-up on these recommendations. So yes, our intention is to include the report that we just tabled. And sometimes the subject is so important that we have to revisit it. And so we're going to continue that follow-up. The department and their internal auditors should also follow up. So we're going to work in collaboration with the department. Thank you very much.
We will now move to Mr. Blois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to Ms. Hogan for being here today. Obviously, a lot of very useful information for this committee. I'm going to start on the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Being a Member of Parliament from Nova Scotia, this program is extremely important. I know a lot of individuals and constituents that I represent are involved in the shipyard work in Halifax. And obviously, Canada has a shipbuilding history, but these types of contracts only come in certain type of decades along the way. And I was just curious, I mean, you mentioned that there were some delays in the first 2 ships that were built. Is some of that tied to the fact that we have to build capacity in some of these industries, that it is not a continuation and there's not always these types of contracts that require this type of skill set and this type of procurement happening year over year, so to speak?
Oh, thank you for the question about the shipbuilding strategy. It's important to start off, I think, with what the three objectives were of the strategy. So it was to renew the fleet in a timely and affordable way, to create and support a marine sector, and also to generate economic benefits for the country. So some of what we saw in the delays were a bit of a shared responsibility between the department, between the government knowing exactly the design they wanted and figuring that out, and then production on the sides of the shipyards. And so the intent was to make sure that there wasn't a boom and bust sort of cycle. And that's why focusing in on target state, so having the shipyards meet their target state, is really important, especially as the deadlines move away. It's a way of measuring progress and value. And the departments did not do a good job at following up on that target state, and still the shipyards have not met it yet. That's essential.
Ms. Hogan, can I ask how the timeframes for these ships being built in the first place, like how are they benchmarked? Are they versus how Canada has done this in the past, other jurisdictions? How do we actually establish the benchmarks and timeframes?
So you're talking about the timeframes on how long it takes to build a ship?
Yeah, you've mentioned there's been a few delays. I know, for example, in Halifax, it could be 8 or 9 months, for example, in your charts and your reports. But how are those initial benchmarks and timeframes even established?
So I'm going to perhaps ask Nick Swales, who's a principal, to see if he can provide sort of that extra detail for you. I don't know that off the top of my head, so I'm going to see if Nick can add that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were not benchmarks established for the initial ships, and so those schedules were really the result of the commitments made by the shipyards to meet certain schedules. We do go on to point out that in the ships projects for the future, there has been more benchmarking. There's been a use of third-party experts and also the experience of how long it has taken to say, what is a reasonable time frame to build such ships.
So obviously what I'm hearing is as we start to get more capacity and understanding, this will tighten up and be able to allow the company and of course the department to hopefully have better timelines. One quick question, because I do want to go on to another topic, but around maintenance, I know that in the report you talked about there was some deferred maintenance that was also being done. Does that have any interplay? Because obviously the National Ship Strategy is dealing with new builds. Was there some maintenance that could have delayed some of these timelines, or is that unrelated?
I think I might let Nick try to tackle that one as well. I just want to offer up that, I think the departments and the shipyards agreed that their timelines were not very realistic, and they believe that they've established more realistic timelines with some of the actions they took during our audit. Nick, I don't know if you can add to answer the member's question.
Thank you. Just to say that we didn't speak to maintenance. What we spoke to was life extensions and the need for those. And certainly those, because ships are not being produced as quickly or are not being produced on one time frame. They need to extend the lives of existing ships in order that that they can continue operating until the ships are replaced.
I have about 30 seconds left according to my clock, Madam Chair. Ms. Hogan, obviously, if I had more time, I really wanted to get into the Indigenous water advisories, particularly concerning, I would agree with my colleagues completely. Whether or not you can answer it now or maybe in future opportunities, but is around the capacity. It seems like, yes, we've kind of dealing with funding, but there's a capacity issue in having trained operators and having communities themselves be able to maintain these types of assets such that we don't get into those situations. If you could, and I don't know if I have any time, but if you could speak to that, I'd be interested.
It would need to be a very short answer.
I guess really short, I would say, yes, I agree. That's part of the issue that we're seeing, and whether that comes from, a solution through the funding formula or not, having that expertise in those communities is something that's needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blois. We will now move on to our 2.5-minute round, starting with Mr. Blanchette-Jonquin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go quickly, Ms. Hogan, on the national shipbuilding strategy. You had sounded the alarm on the important delays at the Coastal Guard and the Navy to ensure safety and the St. Lawrence in particular. What I'm noticing is that even the parliamentary budget officer said that billions of dollars could have been saved. There are two suppliers, Seaspan and Irving. I don't want to bring you into the political arena, but would a greater diversity of sharing of contracts, could that have accelerated the process that's currently underway? And it's hard for us to see the end currently. Well, I don't know if I have the solution, but what I can tell you is what we noticed during the audit. The government made decisions to try to put the strategy back on the rails. And one decision they made was to add a third shipbuilding yard, which was Davie, to help with construction. And so they noticed that this was a way to improve and to help put the strategy back on the right path. So only time will tell if that's the case. Did you notice, Ms. Hogan, that by opting for Davie, there was more savings and better timeline? Well, I don't think we looked at those aspects rather. We saw that the shipyards were chosen after an open process, and the Davie shipyard qualified as an eligible supplier. So I don't know if I can answer your question more than that. Perfect. Now, going back to the 2021-2022 main estimates, in point 26, you pointed out that you wanted to follow up on past audits. I'd like to know, given the current situation of the pandemic, we're seeing things in the media a lot, and that's health transfers. Could you in the future speak to this as was done in 2008 with transfers made between the federal government and the provinces? It might be necessary to do a new analysis. Do you think that would be possible for your office? Well, everything is possible. It just needs to be considered. Thank you for giving us this additional suggestion. I don't know if it's already included in the follow-up that we're going to do shortly, but we've noted it. And we'll let you know in the next iteration. Thank you.
Very much. Colleagues, our last questioner in this hour will be Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I will use these 2.5 minutes to actually address the transportation issue. When I return back to my community, to my city of Hamilton Center, my home is within 500 meters from a rail line. And again, as a city councilor, when the tragedy happened in Quebec, I tried to find information about what types of materials were coming through, what the government was doing. And yet in this report, the things that jump out at me is that the government actually allowed the safety management system to be developed by the corporations. And it has all these policies and targets and risk assessments that are set by the companies. And there's nothing, if I'm to be clear, there's nothing in place to actually see whether their safety systems are resulting in greater safety. Is that a fair assessment, Ms. Hogan?
So what we saw in our audit, we did do we sampled audits of the safety management systems in the railway companies, and the Transport Canada increased the number of audits that they're doing on those safety management systems. But again, it's very similar to their own activities. They were not able to demonstrate that those safety management systems actually helped improve the safety. So they're missing that outcome step in all of their work to see that it's
Pretty
actually making
important
a
step.
difference.
It's like the most important step. And to be clear, you found that Transport Canada is not measuring whether these are actually effective and whether these issues have been corrected. And so, like, how can they actually address the actions for the risks of accidents? Like, what happens after they go through the process?
Well, I think that's why we've made the point that when you invest this amount of time and effort and individuals, you should be able to measure that effectiveness for a few reasons. One, to see the benefit of all that work, but also to know whether or not you're doing the right things that you should be doing. And so while we were happy to see that they addressed some of our recommendations, there is a lot left to do. That effectiveness piece is, in my opinion, one of the most important steps.
I'm gonna hope that we can get there, and I'll end with this last question. In your opinion, do you believe that your audit makes it clear that there needs to be a review of whether the safety management system is even appropriate or effective at keeping the railway safe and holding railway companies accountable? I'm sorry, you are on.
You are muted.
I muted myself. There you go. I think it's a bit of a question of policy. It was written into the legislation that companies should develop these. And what we looked at is whether or not Transport in Canada was doing their proper oversight on that. So I do believe that it's Transport Canada, as the expert in transportation, who should decide whether those mechanisms are the most effective, right? We were saying that they did not measure that the extra surveillance was making a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues, for your questions. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us this morning. I will suspend for a short period of time while they leave the meeting and the new witnesses arrive, and we will quickly do some sound checks. (21-22) and the main estimates. So I will call vote 1. And Ms. Hogan, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the work of our office, including our most recent departmental reports. With me today are Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General, Hélène Haddad, the Principal responsible for Financial Management, and Kimberly LeBlanc, the Principal responsible for Human Resources. The Office of the Auditor General of Canada contributes to a well-managed and accountable government for Canadians. We do this by providing Parliament and territorial legislatures with independent and objective information, advice, and assurance about government financial statements and the management of government programs. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development assists me by conducting reviews and audits that relate to the environment and sustainable development. I am pleased to inform the committee that on February 1st, Mr. Jerry DeMarco was appointed as the new commissioner for a 7-year term. We also support the development of legislative audit methodology and accounting and auditing standards, and we work internationally to build audit capacity and promote better managed and more accountable international institutions. Let me turn first to our 2019-2020 Departmental Results Report. We provided this report to Parliament in December of 2020. As shown in our financial statements, our net operating cost was $102.4 million, and we employed the equivalent of 567 full-time employees. With these resources, we completed 16 performance audits, including 4 led by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, and 3 reported to the Northern legislatures. In addition, we conducted 3 special examinations of Crown corporations. In terms of our financial audit work, we issued clean opinions on 85 of the 88 financial statements we audited from the federal and territorial governments and Crown corporations. We also presented our annual commentary on our financial audit work. Our departmental results reports include several indicators of the impact of our work, along with measures of our operational performance. One of the ways in which we assess the impact of our performance audit work is through the level of parliamentary engagement with our audit reports. Parliamentary committees reviewed 26% of the reports that we presented to Parliament in the 2019-20 fiscal year, compared with 58% in the prior year. This drop can be attributed to the lower number of sitting days during the year due to the fall 2019 federal election campaign and the temporary suspension of Parliament due to the pandemic. However, I'm pleased to say that with the hearings over the last few months, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts has been able to review all of the performance audits referred to it during the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Je vais maintenant parler de notre budget.
Let me turn now to our main estimates and our departmental plan for the upcoming 2021-22 fiscal year. Under Vote 1 of the main estimates, our program expenditures for the 2021-22 fiscal year are now set at $105 million, which include the entire $25 million of additional permanent funding we requested. With these resources, we plan to employ the equivalent of 737 full-time employees. I would like to thank this committee because your unwavering support was instrumental in resolving our resourcing challenges. With this increase in base funding, one of our main priorities for the upcoming year is to increase our capacity in the performance audit practice, which includes the audit reports that we present to Parliament and Northern Legislative Assemblies. This year represents a step toward re-establishing a broader audit coverage of government programs and spending, including the environmental and sustainable development audits that are issued by the Commissioner. In addition to reports related to the COVID-19 response, we are auditing a range of topics, including those related to natural health products, water basins, and outreach to vulnerable populations, as well as updates on past audits. Now that we have secured our permanent funding, we have been proactive in hiring the additional, diverse, and qualified professional and support staff we need. As you can imagine, onboarding and training newly hired employees will be critical for the coming years. Another priority in the 2021-2022 fiscal year will be to continue modernizing our approaches, tools, and products. Madam Chair, I could not be prouder of everyone at the OAG. They are resilient, caring, and devoted to excellence. We thank the committee for its ongoing support and use of our work. We would be pleased to answer the committee's questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. Colleagues, we will now go to our first round of questioning, a 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Lawrence.
Perfect. Just a brief scheduling thing that hopefully won't take away from my time. I would like to cover. I have some issues in terms of scheduling I want to raise. I was hoping that perhaps we could schedule 15 minutes with everyone's unanimous consent for committee business at our next meeting. Is that okay with everyone? Okay.
I'm seeing thumbs up. Nobody raising any issues with that. I will work with the clerk to make sure that happens. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. And thank you to the Auditor General for appearing, and I'm glad to see that she's received the funding. And if our committee and myself had a little part of that, I'm glad to have supported that. Just with respect to the process, and I'm glad that the Auditor General, you seem open to the idea of maybe changing the process a little bit. I mean, a lot of the process was these grand unveils where we would be using literally typewriters to come up with pages, hundreds of pages, and then present them to the committee. And that's not really the way the world works anymore. And quite frankly, it reduces the effectiveness of the recommendations if they're 2 or 3 years later. But I would like to get her comment. Maybe she can expand upon how the committee could work with that, because I would be all fully supportive of the idea of having interim or temporary or smaller reports that come to the committee more often so that we can actually get back and fix these things, right? Because what I see is a pattern here, whether we're talking about First Nations and Indigenous water clarity, or we're talking about shipbuilding, or we're talking about the Phoenix debacle and digital, or even things we haven't contemplated yet, like vaccine procurement. We see these failures, but we don't get them in time to change the results. We hear about process updates, but I don't see any processes I don't see any results coming from that. So maybe the Auditor General could comment on how we could work with her to actually make a change, as opposed to just having process change, but actually get results for Canadian people.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. I feel like you've been sitting with me when I talk to all the people in our office about we have to look at the process. Absolutely, we need to help improve that, but we should keep our eye on the outcomes. And so a part of how I hope to accomplish that is by breaking down some of the audits. And I think you're going to start seeing that, and it will be able to have a dialogue about how we want to approach that together, so that you can study a subject appropriately. So I'm going to use 2 examples. One would being CERB. There is going to be, we're going to table our first part of our CERB audit in a few days, in about 14 days actually, and it won't cover the whole program. It is actually meant to identify what's going on now and help feed the department to deal with looking at payments in the next round. And you mentioned vaccines. That's another one that we're actually looking at breaking it down into more manageable pieces. I guess then the decision might be, does the committee want to study the bits and pieces, or wait to study the entire program or subject, right? So for vaccines, we're going to try and target in and look at the contracting of those in order to give public health agencies some time to deal with the rollout. But then our intention is to look at approval and rollout to the provinces. So we're going to try and break it up. I really think it's about us having a good dialogue about how the best way to study that going forward might be.
Yeah, and I would not hold myself to speak out in front of the entire committee, but for my part, is I want to see the bits and pieces. We can have the longer big term reports as well, but there's just the world just moves so quickly these days. Like my days in the private sector, like you had to be agile and quick and get those reports done. And so with respect to the vaccines, can you disclose whether we'll be hearing from yourself in the near future with respect to the vaccine procurement, or when we might be hearing from you, or is that something you can disclose at this point?
So I'm very happy that we're all willing to try something new, because I think that's what we should do. I'm here for 10 years to help serve Parliament, and I want to make sure that I'm meeting your needs. So it's definitely something I want to engage in with all of you. From a vaccine perspective, there will be nothing tabled in March. We are in very good dialogue with the departments about how best to structure that. And I'm also in a dialogue with the Auditor General's in the provinces to see whether or not we could coordinate the timing of audits, because federally, I can only go so far in the whole vaccination issue, and that then it becomes a provincial matter. And so I'm having a dialogue with my provincial counterparts to see if they would like to time an audit that they could do afterwards, so that the whole vaccination picture, sort of from approval to shot in the arm, is looked at.
Okay. How much time do I have left, Chair?
You have 1.5 minutes.
Perfect. Thanks very much. I'm not nearly as good at timing as Mr. Green, so the next question I'd like to follow up is on the digital side, related to what we were talking about. I think that this will be key for our future going forward. And you've seen the CRA have an inability to talk to other departments. We also saw the Phoenix debacle. Where could you talk, like, where we are more generally? Is there a digital strategy that you're comfortable with the government? What have you seen in that? And is that something you'll be looking at in the coming year?
So the Chief Information Officer of Canada has a digital strategy. The federal government has a digitization strategy. I think everyone's going on that journey. The pandemic has forced a lot of us to take steps faster than we would have done, and I think that's a positive, and we need to keep building on that. We talk a lot about modernizing IT. We have to do it ourselves as well as the federal government, and so we do have a few audits that we're targeting going down the future. We're looking at a cybersecurity audit. We're actually trying to figure out all of the security around that. So there will be a cybersecurity audit coming in the future. I encourage you to go take a look at our website. One of the things that I've tried to do is get more than 1 year of a planned audit work on there, bearing in mind that it might change and move and ebb and flow as we figure out the right timing. But there should be 2 years there, and you'll be able to see that far out. But cybersecurity and IT are definitely going to be things at the forefront of our mind as we go forward.
Thank
One
you.
last quick comment, Chair.
Oh,
One quick. I'm already done. I just put it on the record quickly. Would love to hear as soon as possible on the vaccinations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. We will now go to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and to your office for all the hard work you've done in delivering these reports. And congratulations to Mr. DeMarco on his new appointment. In your answer to Mr. Lawrence about breaking down the reports into smaller bits, I gather that this was part of your departmental plan. And I'm wondering if you could just elaborate on the new vision and mission that you've outlined in that plan, and how it will be used to improve the operations at the OAG and guide future audit work.
Thank you for that question. I worked very hard with my executive team after lots of consultations and discussions with all of our people across the office to make sure that our vision spoke to people. And I think it addresses what I've been telling this committee for a while, that I want to modernize not just our processes, but how we work and how we interact. And that's why exploring breaking down some of the audits into smaller pieces is one of those things we have to try to see how it works and see how it goes. It also includes how we communicate. So again, if I encourage you to go to our website, we just posted an infographic about rail safety that accompanies the audit report. We want to see how that is digested, and if individuals like that and find that it's a meaningful way to understand the report. Our new vision is to bring together people, expertise, and technology. And we see that as the people within our office and the people in the entities we audit. We see that as bringing together our expertise and the expertise in the public service, in the programs that we audit, and in all of the initiatives that they put forward, and then technology. I think not only do we have to modernize and use technology in a better way, so does the federal public service. There are so many opportunities with new technologies to get a better handle on data and be more informed. And we need to take that journey with the government so that we can provide better value added through our audits.
And I'm hoping to see more of the infographics and simpler language so that people can, Canadians across the country can understand some of the reports and recommendations. So parliamentary committees reviewed 26% of the reports that were presented in 2019 to 2020, compared to 58% in the previous year. And I can understand why only 26 reports were reviewed, partly because of the fall federal election and also because of the pandemic. What happens to those reports that are not reviewed?
So coming up with that percentage is a little complicated, so I want to talk about a few things that are in it. It includes all the reports that we will table in the House. So a few years ago, we started to table all our special examinations on Crown corporations so that they would be available if a parliamentary committee wanted to study them. They are available publicly on every Crown's website, but we wanted them to be in one place for Parliament. So those are not often studied. We consider that in there, but they have been discussed with the board of directors of the Crown corporation. They have an action plan, and their internal audit shops and their board of directors will follow up on the corporation taking those actions. So while they may not be studied in Parliament, they are studied and looked at. In this case, many of the audit reports that when we issued our results looked like they hadn't been reviewed, as I mentioned in my opening statement, were reviewed by the Public Accounts Committee. There are reports of the Commissioner that are referred to the Environment Committee that are not always studied there. And that's where I would even encourage any committee across Parliament to study any of our reports. We are always happy to talk about our work, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be studied by the committee that refers to them.
So if it's not studied by a committee, is there any follow-up on the recommendations? Is there any accountability to the organizations that you're studying? I just want to make sure that your reports are so valuable and so much hard work goes into it that something comes out of it.
Thank you very much. I agree with you. We spend a lot of time, so do the departments and entities we audit, that we want to make sure that we actually make a change that improves programs and the lives of Canadians. So we have a few options. We either follow them up. We have this new product that I mentioned that we're going to be putting together that will look at certain measures in some of our audits. And actually, it's going to be more of an electronic product than a paper product that we're hoping will be able to add some pressure to the departments to recognize that we may come in on a more regular basis to start doing that quick follow-up, so that and making it publicly available so that everyone can see what's going on. As I mentioned earlier, we will always follow up on important topics in a larger, more comprehensive way. But there's also the internal audit departments within departments and agencies that should be following up on the recommendations that come from our financial and our performance audits, and that their departmental audit committees should be asking those questions as well.
Chair, do I have any more time left?
You are at 6 minutes exactly, so great timing. Thank you so much, Ms. Yip. We will move on to Mr. Blanchette-Jonca.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question for Ms. Hogan, of course. Ms. Hogan, I'm trying to verify what was already established around a motion in the House of Commons in 2020 to allow you to fulfill an emergency audit on COVID-19. There is a report on the observations that's supposed to be tabled at the latest 1st of June 2021, and there was an order of the House that asked the government to take necessary measures to make sure that your office had enough resources to do your work. I know that during our last meeting, you informed us that it's not easy in a COVID context to get information from some departments. So I'd like to know, are you going to be able to carry out the report on COVID at the latest June 1st, 2021? Well, the answer isn't straightforward. I'll try to answer your question in full. Well, addressing the motion means looking at all programs put in place in response to the pandemic. I mentioned this earlier. This is a request that is rather impossible the audits in response to the pandemic is something that can take years. We're trying to look at programs that are more significant based on certain risks and discussions with the departments, and we're going to table 4 reports in March, so before the June 1st deadline. And these will address, at least it'll be a start in addressing the matter. But we're going to have to look at programs connected to the response to the pandemic. We're going to do that over years. We're going to have other reports coming later in the year, and there will be reports in 2022. And so you're going to see reports over a number of years that will try to address this motion. We are unable to address that motion in its entirety by June 1st. To help you do your work, Ms. Hogan, what can the committee do? Because we've pushed so that you would get your funding. I understand that there's a technological transition underway. You're going to hire additional personnel. What can we do on our end to help you do your work? Well, study our reports and be a little patient. We are going to receive our funding. We have already taken measures to hire people. Indeed, this year we hired almost 100 people. So these aren't all new employees. This also addresses the normal turnover, but we did hire 100 new individuals and we're currently onboarding them. They have to be trained. So the capacity will start to increase, that's for sure. At the same time, we're addressing our technological gaps. We've got a good plan in place to deal with that aspect within IT. So the money will be spent very shortly to help the systems. It's not just systems. We also need individuals to implement those systems. So there's a lot of things underway within our organization. And the idea is to enhance our capacity. I understand that to do your reports, you need data, and that data comes from the different departments. How is communication going? Are you getting responses and on time according to the deadlines you've set? Yes and no. Quite honestly, it depends on the department. It depends if they're engaged or not in the pandemic response. There are delays, that's for sure. There are delays in getting information to us. I mentioned at another time to this committee that it's standard, that is standard, rather. And there are a lot of individuals in the departments who are very busy. And there's times when we would like to finish things up, but those things are pushed forward. So it's not something that I find particularly problematic at the time, but it does require that we be agile, and we sometimes have to place audits on other subjects. Well, beyond information that lacks from some departments, is there anything else that can sometimes delay your audits? Not really, except the requests to look into all the COVID programs. That's an immense request. So we are going to answer the motion, but it will take us several years. Okay, just want to understand, Ms. Hogan. You said that the 4 reports that are going to come out soon, how many of those will be concerning COVID and that will be tabled before the 1st of June? Well, in May, we're going to try to deliver some as well, but it's hard to say the exact number. There's going to be more later in the year, that's for sure. I could get back to you with that if you like, but there are also COVID-related audits planned for 2022 and 2023. So there are going to be reports. Perhaps we could keep you abreast of those and of the number of audits. Yes, in your opinion, Ms. Hogan, reports that haven't been planned for yet, but that are absolutely important, are there ones like that that the committee should study? That you should study? That we should ask your office to produce and then that we would study, of course. Well, I think we already had a discussion together. Members of our office with your committee already had that discussion. We're going to look at CERB and at vaccines and a lot of pandemic-related programs. There's no shortage of subjects to look into. We just need the time. Excellent.
Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. We will now move on to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Thank you for that. And I want to take a step back to the previous section. I didn't get a chance to do this. And I think it's important every now and again we take a step back and do this, because in the audit world, no news is good news. So when you have a department that comes through or an agency that comes through without any juice or anything spicy, they get overlooked. And I just wanted to go back to your opening remarks from the last section and note that the special examination of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, that you were pleased to report that there were no significant deficiencies in the corporate management practices or in the management of outreach and awareness activities during the period. I want to take a moment and just welcome, I believe, their new ED, Mohammed Hashim, who's incredible. I'll share with you that his work in the surveys on online hate have played a role, I think, in helping Canadians better understand what online hate looks like in Canada. And I think that's valuably important. And I never want to miss the opportunity of singing praise at this committee and just taking a step back to do that, because I often come off as pretty agitated and hot on a lot of topics. But on this particular agency, I think we're definitely going down the right track there. So I want to take a moment and just note that. So well done to that particular foundation. I want to now segue into your comments about having secured your permanent funding, that you are proactively hiring additional diverse and qualified professionals. I'm wondering if you can just take a moment and explain to us what steps you're taking within your department to do that, and how you're committed to the outcomes and not just the process of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you very much for the question. I might turn to Kim LeBlanc at some point, if maybe she wants to add, if I might forget a few things about some of the actual concrete actions that we're taking to focus on outcomes. We do look at our, employment equity distribution, and in my mind, those are just minimums that we need to meet. We need to overshoot for that. I recognize that we're doing a great job in our staff levels across the office. We still have some work to do. Not every group is well represented. For sure, we have some work to do in the Indigenous community, and we have some very targeted outreach that we're doing there that I'm sure Madame LeBlanc could add to. I recognize that we need to do better when it comes to our management level. And that we have to work on that. We're actually in the middle of a hiring or promotion process at the principal level in our office. And again, we're looking to certain lists that the government has available for diverse populations for us to look at, for us to try and address some of that. So we're definitely focused on that outcome. It's definitely something I keep asking our hiring managers and our HR team. So I don't know, Kim, if maybe you want to add a few more things that might help address the member's question.
And Kim, with specificity, can you also add what were the results of your GBA Plus as applied to the OAG's governance structures?
Hello, members of the committee. I'm pleased to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. One comment I might make is that there is a lot of dynamic dialogue with senior management, and they all accepted to sign the anti-racism and discrimination statement. So there's huge commitment on the senior executive side of things. When we talk about outcomes, Mr. Green, interesting, because we've just started our awareness, our journey awareness when it comes to diversity and inclusion, across the organization. We're into a lot of awareness education activities. And when it comes to recruitment, a lot of our employees are actually very, they're our ambassadors. So that's been very helpful, because we've been able to recruit in the 4 employment equity groups this last year.
This is great news, and I'll share with you why. Because you'll recall in this committee, through the nonpartisan work of this committee, we ensured that when we talked about the plus, that we added on the identity factors such as race, ethnicity, religion, age, mental and physical disability in its performance audits. And I think that's a huge step. And I'm hopeful that through your learning and applying it to your own department, that you're also going to be committed to using this more frequently in your performance audits. So I'll put the question to you, Ms. Hogan. Is that a commitment? I see a nod, but just to reiterate the good work of the committee and your commitment to this, that you'll go on the record today and say that indeed this will now become part of the process that you employ across your audits?
So absolutely. I think in our recent hiring practices, I want to address two issues there. About 44% of the individuals we've hired have self-identified as visible minorities. And absolutely GBA Plus, as well as SDGs, are something that I have tasked one of the Assistant Auditor Generals with making sure is included or considered in every single audit. Some audits lend to it easier, but we are definitely going to start looking not only at how the government
how do you demand for race-based disaggregated data? I apologize, I got 10 seconds. How do you demand for race-based disaggregated data?
How do we do? Well, we're going to ask for it. I'm not sure we're always going to find it, but we're definitely going to start the dialogue and keep the pressure on the departments that we audit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We will now go to our second round of questioning. It's a 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Weber.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go along the same line Mr. Green was going on with the new staffing, Ms. Hogan, and your FTEs, your full-time equivalents. Of course, you mentioned you want to get up to about 737 by, I guess, 2021, 22 year. I guess my question is, because of this pandemic, everyone's working at home, and there is certainly a move to have more workers work from home in the future. So are you still maintaining the office space that you've had since last February while investing in IT to have people work from home? Just curious to know what percentage of your staff also works at home right now, and these new hires, are you having them work out of their house, or are you adding more space for them in your offices?
So when it comes to our physical space, we have not made any changes to our physical space yet. That was at the request of Treasury Board as we all sort out what's going on. We're in an active dialogue with them continuously about what our physical space might look like. What we've communicated to all of our employees is that flexibility is going to be our way forward. We definitely see a hybrid workforce going forward. What I can tell you, in the individuals that we've hired in the last year, I believe there's about a quarter of them that are in cities where we do not have bricks and mortar. So we have regional offices across the country, but we have not, traditionally we would only hire in those cities and make people relocate, and we have not done that. We are just looking for talent across the country, and are telling them that they can work from home right now, and we're going to sort out what that might look like in the future. Currently, the majority of our workforce is at home. We do have certain facilities, individuals, and IT folks who are in on a more regular basis. We do have people who regularly require access in order to access secret document into the in our building. But for the most part, we are all working from home, respecting public health guidelines and doing our part. We see that as the way forward, though, that it will be likely a hybrid. You'll be in, you'll be out, you'll be at entities, you'll be home, you'll be at work. Work is what you do, not where you go, right?
Exactly. So I don't see any plans in your department of any renovations or any expansions of office space in the near future.
Well, I think as we likely might downsize, we'll have to do some sort of reconfiguring, that's for sure. But right now we've done nothing. We've closed off places actually, so that if individuals go in, they can't go there to access in large numbers.
Right. Okay. I just want to quickly go to an area that was brought up earlier about your future audits. Of course, pandemic-related audits that you had mentioned. I know we all know that you do audits with government departments and crown corporations and such, and even provincial audits as well. I'm just curious to know, Have you ever had an audit done in your department? And who does that audit? Who does the audit of the Office of the Auditor General? Just curious. And when was the last audit, and who did it? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Everybody wants to know who audits the auditors, right? So we have a few audits. We have an annual financial audit, like most entities, that is carried out by an accounting firm that is independent from us, and we rotate them on an occasional basis. So that's the financial side. We have an internal audit shop who carries out, traditional internal audit work across our office, and we also have peer reviews. So traditionally, and I was in the office when both Sheila Fraser and Mike Ferguson launched their peer review, where Supreme Audit Institutes from other parts of the country come in and review our office. And I committed at the beginning of my mandate that before I was done, we would do a peer review as well. And the peer review really looks at the entire office performance audit, our internal operations, and our financial audit work. So I also want to add that because we are a teaching office for CPAs, we are regularly inspected by provincial institutes as well as to how we do to mentor and train our students and whether or not we adequately support them to get their designations going forward. So there's a lot of people looking at it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for that. And Madam Chair, I think I'm out of time.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Weber. That was a great question. We will now go to Mr. Longfield for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Ms. Hogan and your staff for being here, and my colleagues. Great meeting, great discussions, and really, I want to build on some of the areas that Mr. Lawrence was touching base on, Mr. Green, how we work better together, and what we could do to help your work. You're definitely helping our work with some of what you're discussing today. Two areas for me that I maybe in terms of how we work together. One is I'm looking at SWOT analysis, and something I lived and breathed for about 30 years in business. And the particular part of the SWOT analysis being the threats. As you're auditing, we had a passionate discussion about Indigenous water supply and clean water for all Canadians. One of the threats that the elders brought up, one elder in particular, and Stu Lookout brought up with me, was stop making the water dirty, and then we've got a better shot at having clean water. So things like the Clean Water Agency, or ways to stop water pollution at its source. A threat to the you look at the process, but the actual threat might be outside the process. And could you maybe comment, Ms. Hogan, on how we could address the external threats to the audits that you're performing?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I didn't think that's where you were going when you were asking that question. I think I have a few things there. So I think you wanted to know how you could help support better. And I think it's definitely keeping the constant focus when you bring departments and entities in front of you on the quality of their data, the importance of knowing what data they need, how they collect it, how they store it, how they retrieve it, how they use it. So really having a data strategy. I think every organization should have one. So I think that's a really important one, to continue to push accountability and transparency, and actually getting really answers that are focused on outcomes and staying focused there. I think if we had issues about access, we would come to you, and we would hope that you would be able to help us address access issues from that front. Now, external threats, I think it's a great dialogue that I've even started with the Commissioner of the Environment, and it was interesting to hear your comment about the water. And I do think that that's a focus that we have to have when we look at audit selection. And then it's the kinds of questions that you might ask when we come here. We often have a hard time getting to some of the root causes in our audits. And so really asking the departments about that and challenging them to think that way, I think will go a long way. It'll likely take some time to change that sort of headspace, but we should be able to do that together.
Yeah, thank you. And in the Environment Committee yesterday, we had Mr. DeMarco, and talking about hiring people within his department to do a better job of getting to the root cause on some of the environmental audits being done. But he also mentioned all of the support staff, the legal people, the people in the background that also support the audits, because there has been a public discussion around we need a separate group of people auditing environmental concerns. He was allaying some of that by saying, no, we have some investment happening right now. We're developing more expertise around the environment. How that gets communicated out to the public is another question that I might have of what your main focus areas are as you're building out your staff and whether you're really developing a center of excellence idea around the environmental audits.
So Jerry DeMarco has been with the office. I think he's on week 5. Yeah. Andrew Hayes, who was the interim commissioner, and I have been having many dialogues with him about that. And we are focused on building a center of excellence, but recognizing that to some degree you need a mainstream SDGs in our audits in order to encourage all of government to mainstream them. That's the best way to focus on actually achieving some of those outcomes, right? So we have to do that on the audit side because I think it's the expectation that everyone start thinking about the impacts of what they do on the environment, on society, and on the economy, right?
And maybe in terms of the audit, the conflicting pieces, like I met earlier today with some researchers on translational research on drugs. And where the pharmaceutical companies won't invest if they're in a country where they're not making money. And so you've got conflicting programs that will also somehow have to be sorted out. But I think I'm out of time. I just put that as another one. The opportunities is how do we manage the conflicting programs?
Thank you very much, Mr. Longfield. We will now go to the 2.5 round of questioning, starting with Mr. Blanchette-Jonca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hogan, I saw your enthusiasm around point 10 that you highlighted in your opening remarks. It had to do with the possibility of taking a look at past audits. We know currently with the pandemic, there are expenses and that have been absolutely historic. So would there be an update needed on federal and provincial territorial transfers? This is something that was already done by your office in December of 2008, so I'd like to know, would something like that be relevant or possible to quickly evaluate an update of that study? Well, I admit that I'm not aware of this study. We have so many reports, but thank you for bringing my attention to that. I will look into it. We're trying to look at a number of reports. It's not always easy to do that with recommendations. Sometimes that's easier when there are measures, when it's easier to verify them. Now, of course, we're going to start doing that. Well, with the pressure on our resources, this is one of the things that we've kind of let slide. And we want to enhance that follow-up because I think that a follow-up leads to changes. And so that's why we want to look at that a little more regularly. I hope that maybe we can do that every year. Once you review our new product, I hope that we'll be able to update it regularly, maybe every 18 months. In any case, a more regular pace rather than every 5 or 6 years. Okay, so this would, for the study from 2008, these are for transfer payments, including social programs. And you can see now there are transfers from the federal government towards the provinces and Quebec and the territories. And so I think it would be relevant to look into that and find out how that's unfolding in a context of today, like with the pandemic, record amounts we're talking about. How would you proceed with such a study? Well, we look at the transfer payments every year through our public accounts audit, so we could look into that. A study is a little different from an audit, but I've noted it down as a suggestion. And I don't know what else I could add to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchette-Jonca. We will now move to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I wanted to provide the opportunity for you to address security issues. In your 2019-2020 departmental results report, you stated that the security team had one security incident during the year where a third party released contents from one of your draft audit reports, and that you conducted an investigation and immediately put mitigating factors into place. What was the nature of the breach and the reasons it happened? And what were the measures put in place to mitigate the risks of something similar happening?
I might turn to Andrew to add some details, but I think I could be able to answer all of your question. So the nature of the breach was an individual who was an advisor on a financial audit, an academic who released some of the contents of our audit report before it was tabled in the House. So as soon as that happened, we did an investigation. We alerted the individual that they were in breach of the confidentiality clause that they had agreed to by signing on to become an advisor on one of our audits. We take a pre-release of our reports very seriously, and we believe that it's important that they be released to Parliament as a whole all at once, and that any individual who might provide us with advice or guidance throughout the process needs to respect that need to keep the information embargoed. I don't know, Andrew.
Is that somebody who's still, are they still a consultant with you? Like what happens when something like an NDA disclosure breach? Are they now on like a blacklist or excluded?
Andrew, do you think you could add to?
Yeah, so that advisor was on a very specific audit. That person had very specific expertise. So it's not somebody that we have used regularly, and we haven't used their services since. But if that were to happen, we in the context of somebody who was regularly contracting with us, we would enforce the confidentiality provisions. And if they weren't able to continue to maintain confidentiality, we wouldn't use them anymore.
Okay. I'm satisfied with that. I think it was important for us to have the opportunity to address that as a committee, because what happens is this stuff, the political nature of which the sensitivity of the information that you are handling, the relationships that are in a very small town called Ottawa can become very problematic. And so I'll say, without knowing all the details or getting into them, that I would just caution the department from being potentially impugned by by the indiscretions of consultants that you bring on, and perhaps there could be a better onboarding orientation process or a clearer NDA process to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. We will now move to our 5-minute round of questioning, starting with Mr. Berthold.
Merci, ça va aller mieux comme ça.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Hogan. These are more comments, really. Well, you'll understand. With the additional amounts that we fought for you to get, well, it's just as significant for us as in past years, but I have 2 or 3 questions. When you table a series of reports at the same time, and we've studied all of that at the same time, do you have the intention, I think you said this, but do you have the intention of presenting a number of reports? At what pace will you deliver these reports? Now, how are you going to share the reports related to COVID and the reports that you're going to decide on continuing yourself? Because this is really what's at the heart of your office, is to initiate its own reports and evaluate and do performance audits. So how are you going to choose and distribute your time and energy fairly so that you're not deprived of fulfilling your mandate properly? As parliamentarians, we've all supported you in doing your work. Thank you for the 2 questions. Well, the pace at which we're going to table the reports. Well, according to the law, we can do this in Parliament 4 times per year. And so we try to do one in the fall and in the spring. These reports will not be connected to COVID. So the ones that I tabled in February were supposed to be tabled the year before, and they had to do with programs unrelated to COVID. When it has to do with COVID, we have a section in our Act that gives us permission to table something that's very important on an as-needed basis to Parliament. And so that's what we're going to do for the COVID-related reports. I'm going to try to table them in small batches so that you can digest them. And it's at that point that the parliamentary committees can tell us if that's too much or not. But my intention was to give you enough reports so that you can choose among them as to which ones you want to study and not be forced to study one particular report that I table. So that's the pace. And if you have a reaction, go ahead. Now, the balance between our reports related to COVID and the other subjects that are very important as well. This is something that we discuss regularly in our office. We even talked about it this morning. So how will we share efforts between our regular programs and our office's audits and the COVID report? So we try to do our best to deal with all three and to do it well and in a balanced way. Some years we might be a little more focused on one compared to the others, but we're going to try to strike a balance. And all reports unrelated to COVID, if there's an aspect related to the pandemic, we will try to look at it. So we're going to try to do that regularly. Now, tabling reports twice a year, is that enough for you, or would you like Parliament to allow you to table them more regularly and within smaller quantities? Because every time you table reports from your office, well, of course, all parliamentarians turn to those reports, and perhaps they don't pay attention to other things that are happening, and that could be positive or negative, because everything that's positive, well, when reports are tabled, people will pay less attention to the positive things and they'll zoom in on the striking aspects. So in your opinion, should we allow the Auditor General to table reports more often in Parliament? Well, there are pros and cons for each, but having more flexibility to table reports when we're ready, that could improve the studying aspect of reports. But as you mentioned, there's a whole process in place when our office tables reports. So the pros and cons, well, maybe if we table reports too often, that might be too much for the government to digest. So that's why we're going to try, well, we tabled reports in February, and we're going to do another one in March. And then you'll give us feedback as to whether or not it's too much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berthold. Our last questioner will be Mr. Sobera.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, colleagues, and good morning, Auditor General. I apologize for missing your introductory remarks. I was on another set of responsibilities this morning. There's been a lot of good questions from my colleagues this morning in terms of delving into the issues at hand and the role of the Auditor General and the environment that we're in. We on Tuesday had the Deputy Minister of Finance at our committee, Mr. Sabia, who obviously, like yourself, has had a vast experience, I would say a treasure trove of experience dealing with organizations and organizational complexity in every sort of capacity. So I think what I'd like to ask, and I think one of my colleagues alluded to it as well, in the era, and actually I think it was Mr. Lawrence actually, so I thank Mr. Lawrence for commenting on this earlier on, was in the era of where digitization, where working from a remote environment, be it the basement of one's home or from wherever, a bedroom, for what we're seeing these days. In that era, how can the AG maintain its effectiveness? Are there any concerns there? Secondly, How can there be the lowering of costs for taxpayers that fund governmental organizations in this era when individuals can be situated at home? I'll start off with that question.
So I think with the remote working environment, it brings out a whole different set of complexities. There's the whole aspect of managing a remote workforce, which is very different from managing a workforce that you get to see every day. I think the tendency historically might have been to reward presenteeism versus delivery, and so it's a whole different aspect of how you manage people. So I think that's a global issue across federal public service and across any organization as you move from workforce in a building to a remote workforce. I think we also have to think about security and safeguarding information. So another concern, how do we maintain our effectiveness? So through the first round of our financial audits, we saw a huge change in how we gathered evidence, how entities could provide us evidence, and now we're seeing it even through our performance audits, the quality of evidence and how we're getting it. So there's a whole set of new challenges that we have to overcome together with the departments. And so it is about how do they digitize? Can we then rely that it's an accurate digitization of a document that they might want to provide to us? So I think it goes back again to some training of individuals about new technologies and how to use them and how to work differently. Do I think it'll reduce costs? I think like any big change, there isn't a reduction of costs at the beginning. It's almost an investment needed in order to get to a place where you can see the outcomes and see the benefits of being more effective and more efficient. But I can assure you that all of our audits, even though it might take us a little longer, are following the same exacting standards we followed before when we saw entities face to face, even though we're seeing them through, MS Teams or Zoom. So you can still rely definitely on the quality of the audits that we're providing to you.
Yes, and I also think, in a traditional audit, the comment was we have auditors on site this week, or we have auditors. So there's obviously going to be new demands on organizations to have really, I don't want to say non-productive hours, but non-productive hours digitizing documents that traditionally auditors would have to come on site to retrieve or to look at. I think those are issues that a lot of organizations are going to deal with. And really, going forward with the environment we're in, and hopefully we'll get to some normality very soon. And I also think for career development, my own personal view is that new individuals coming into the Auditor General are actually benefit from being amongst colleagues. That when someone new comes into an environment, especially when you're starting off your career and you don't have that camaraderie and that mentorship, you just can't do it from sitting at home. I think organizations that think we can just cut off and do remote working are going to actually, I would wager that's going to be reversed very quickly once things get to a normality where they recognize it not. And you are seeing comments from organizations of that matter these days already.
If I could react a little bit to that, Madam Chair, I think flexibility is definitely needed. There may always be situations where an auditor needs to be on site. So let's use, for example, an inventory count. Depends what we're counting. Sometimes you can't always do that in a digital way. So there will be a need to be on site at times. But I think long gone are the days where the auditors are here for the next 4.5 months, right? So I do think that we have to work that through even with the entities that we audit. You raised an important thing about sense of belonging. And I think that's where our young people are actually better with digital world. And Andrew and I have actually started a reverse mentor program that I wanted to share with you so that some of our young recruits can tell us how they better want to work and better be managed. So hopefully we'll learn some great insights that I could share with the committee at some point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sobera and Ms. Hogan. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us. Colleagues, if everyone is satisfied that we have sufficiently studied the main estimates, I do have 2 questions for you. Are you ready for the question on the main estimates today? I see thumbs up and nods. So colleagues, shall vote 1 carry?
On division?
On division, thank you. Shall I report the vote on the main estimates to the House?
On division?
On division, thank you. Thank you very much, members. Thank you for joining us today.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair, I just want to ask a question. Perhaps I haven't understood the concept of on division. I thought that meant that one member didn't agree with the proposal. Is that what you understand from that term? Well, since we didn't have the time to study all of the votes in depth, rather than starting to look at all the details, what we prefer to do is vote on, adopt on division. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Berthold, I did ask if everyone was satisfied that we had sufficiently studied the main estimates, and I was assured that we had.
Yeah.
So we don't have to deal with the main estimates today. They don't have to be reported back to the House until May. So if what I'm hearing from you is that you would like further study on the main estimates, we could definitely do that.
We don't need more time. We don't have that time in committee to do that.
We could do it on another day. We do have it scheduled
we don't need time for that.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have agreed that vote 1 would carry on division, and that I will report the vote on the main estimates to the House. Is the committee in agreement to adjourn the meeting?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Great meeting.
Thank you.